Perfect. All right.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, we are so excited to be here. So, welcome back to Balance and Body Diagnostics podcast, where functional health meets female performance. Today, we're diving deep into some of the most overlooked yet mission critical conversations in the fitness and hormone space, especially for women 35 and up. Our guest today is someone whose work blends science, data, and deeply effective strategies. Monika Eva is a registered holistic nutritionist and a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner who helps women 35 plus lose 10 to 30 pounds naturally and skyrocket energy by fixing the root cause of stubborn weight gain. Through her signature holistic weight loss system, she uses functional testing like HTMA, Dutch, and GI map to take the guesswork out of weight loss, helping women restore their metabolism and finally feel energized, confident, and in control of their bodies. Monika, welcome to the podcast, and we are so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here myself.
Amazing. All right, so we have so much to talk about today, so let's just dive right in. So, the first topic we want to touch on is the overlooked factors in fat loss and recovery. So, one of the things we have chatted about is you have said that minerals are foundational for metabolic health. Can you break down why female athletes especially can't afford to ignore them?
Yeah, 100%. So you really cannot optimize your metabolism or even recover fully from a workout if your mineral status is wrecked. And it's like mic drop right there, right? Minerals are really like the spark plugs of your metabolism. And most women, especially if they're high performers or athletes, they usually will have an unknowingly deficient or imbalanced mineral status, especially if they're not doing anything to combat it. And so um, some of the most common mineral imbalances that I see, especially in like athletic, high performing women, there are going to be sodium and potassium imbalances. These are key for your adrenal health and for energy production. And so, if you are hitting the gym, working out, whether it's every day or every other day or whatever it might be, but you know that you have like a very regimented workout routine, for sure your adrenals are taking a hit, and not in a negative way, right? Like it's fine to exercise, totally fine, but we just want to make sure that your body's able to recover from it. And so making sure that you have a very good balance with the sodium potassium is important. Something else that I see that shows up a lot is this calcium shell. And so a calcium shell happens when there are elevated levels of calcium, and basically it prevents um, the thyroids from working optimally, or it can impact the thyroid. And that's because what ends up happening is with the calcium shell, it prevents certain nutrients from being able to enter and pass through the cell and be utilized. Magnesium burn rate is another huge one. When women are working out, any high output women for that matter, they will burn through magnesium like wildfire. And the thing with magnesium too is that it's one of the first minerals to be depleted when we're going through stress. And exercise, workout routines, just everyday life stress, even, it will burn through magnesium very, very fast.
So,
Um,
oh, sorry, go ahead. There's more.
no, go ahead. You're good to cut in.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so for those of our clients who aren't yet familiar with the HTMA, could you maybe explain why it is that you can see patterns like the ones that you're describing in their hair sample that would explain things like resistant fat loss or poor sleep, not recovering as well as they anticipate recovering, rather than maybe what they might be seeing on their blood work?
Yeah, for sure. So when we're looking at like hair tissue mineral analysis, what it does is it shows us basically the minerals that are being pushed out of the cell and into soft tissue. Whereas when we're looking at blood, we're just looking and measuring at what's circulating in the blood itself. And so those are like two very different things. So you can have something that's present in the blood, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's properly being utilized in the body. Whereas with the hair tissue mineral analysis, so hair is a soft tissue. That's why we know when minerals are pushed out into soft tissue, it's either showing us that there is a loss that's happening because now those minerals aren't in the cell. So, for instance, like with the example that I gave about magnesium, right? If someone has like elevated magnesium levels on their HTMA, this is showing me it's not that they have too much magnesium and they need to cut back on their magnesium supplement. It's probably that they're in a state of high stress and they probably need a little bit more. There's a magnesium loss that's happening. Whereas if, a woman on the other end, if like on the flip side of it, if magnesium's really low, then this is also telling us that there is probably a mineral deficiency. Therefore, there's a higher need for this magnesium. And so when we start looking at the minerals individually, but then also the relationship, the special relationship that they have with each other, it gives us insight into what's happening in the body specifically. So, what we want to see on a hair tissue mineral analysis is everything to be kind of balanced across the board. We want it to be at that optimal level, as close to like the middle line as possible, because then that's telling us that we have very good levels of minerals. And when they're too high or they're too low, then there's probably either too much stress pushing out the mineral or there's a mineral deficiency. And so, like I mentioned, like magnesium, when that's low, that's going to cause a whole lot of issues because that means that the stress you're going through, your body's not properly like able to replenish from it. I mentioned like the sodium, potassium. This is telling us adrenals are being affected, and we sometimes don't realize just how important these things are in the body.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really crazy because most of us don't realize the impact of minerals in our body. And it's also is really tough because in today's world, it's, like one apple in our grandparents' time is worth seven apples today, which is crazy. Like we're so mineral depleted now. So it's just so wild how we just don't realize like the impact that it has on us.
Yeah, so like not only do we not get the minerals from the food, but I also think we live in like a much more stressed out society than what our like generations before us did, right? Whereas like I mean when I look back to even like my great grandparents, like they were farmers. They worked on the farm. Their biggest stress was, what's the weather going to be like today? Can we like I don't know, whatever they did. I don't know exactly like the terminology that farmers use, but it's like, can we till the land? Do we have to, harvest the vegetables? Like, what's going on? Like, that was their huge stress. They were pretty much self-sufficient. Whereas now we're bombarded with so many different stressors. Like, you got to wake up, you got to get to work, you got to get the kids to school. There's also crazy stuff happening in the world. And then on top of that, I also think that we have more time and we live lives where we have more hobbies and there's more demand on our physical bodies, but also I want to say on our emotional and like mentally, there's a lot more demand on us too. And so I think and there's more toxins in the world, and like all of this stuff impacts our health.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what would you think, what do you often see on an HTMA that explains why a client isn't recovering, losing fat, or sleeping well, even when their macros and workouts are dialed?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the most common things is like that four lows pattern where across the board, all like so I call them like the macro minerals. So you have the magnesium, the sodium, the potassium, and the calcium are low. Or even like a calcium shell, which I mentioned, like this can prevent the thyroid hormone from working optimally or the thyroid itself from working optimally. And so when this happens, so for instance, when someone's in like a four low, they're basically, or they have that four lows pattern, they are in this state of burnout. And they might not feel like they're in a state of burnout because, maybe that's just not their personality to like, maybe they're just the type of person that's like, I need to push through. I'm a go-getter. I've got goals and it doesn't matter that I'm tired. It's going to be worth it on the end. And if I'm in the middle of a prep, I know it's only, 12 or 16 weeks long. Like I can just do it. I'll just push through. But really, their body might not be properly responding because they are in this state of burnout.
Yeah, and I mean, I find a lot of the time too that when they find their workouts and their macros aren't necessarily working the best for them, they push harder. And then that also, it pushes them into a more decreased state of minerals, which just kind of makes the problem overall worse.
Yeah, it makes it worse. It can totally backfire on them too, where like you think you're gonna see better results and instead you see more like water retention that happens, the number on the scale starts going up, and then you just get very frustrated because logically, like it's supposed to work. Like in theory, you're supposed to see a difference, yet you're not. It's the opposite is happening. And it can be very like unmotivating.
Yeah, it could be actually really crushing. And it's why a lot of, people just lose stream, they fall off course, they renegotiate their goals. For our athletes, though, that isn't always an option. A lot of them are contractually committed to show dates. And so they do have to keep pushing through, not, being able to even pause to consider something like an HTMA. So for those people specifically, what would you say are like maybe 1 to 2 non-negotiables that you would recommend for restoring mineral balance, metabolic function, potentially midstream while they're actually in prep for a show?
Yeah, so, first things first is just make sure that you are allowing your body to recover as much as possible. So even though you got to stick with your workouts, there's other things that you can do. So I'm not saying you have to take a break from the gym, but like, are you sleeping? If there's issues with sleep, we got to fix that. You got to fix that ASAP, right? That is like a huge, huge thing. The other thing too is like, I am a huge fan of Epsom salt baths. I find that it's a great way for you to get magnesium back into the body without you feeling you have to take like 8 capsules of magnesium. It works really, really well. And so, and honestly, like I would say, work with a holistic health practitioner who can run the labs on you and tell you specifically what it is that you need to do. Because if we're just, if you're just going to follow general advice, it might not necessarily work for you because it might not be exactly what's missing. And so, obviously, like common things, like I mentioned, the sleep, but like hydrating yourself. You can remineralize your water. Make sure you're actually remineralizing your water, whether that's like with trace minerals or electrolytes, like that kind of stuff. Really important. Diet is important. Obviously, they're following like a very strict diet. But like I said, like run the functional labs to see what is happening so that you can follow just like the macros are calculated, let's make sure that like we're also figuring out what to do for your macro minerals as well.
Now, I know that your area of expertise, it seems to be women who are in perimenopause, in menopause, but still extremely active, committing to lots of different, I guess, pillars in their life. And so I think you're going to be able to answer this question for us because we see right now statistically that there are many more women who are in perimenopause and menopause that are entering bodybuilding in a sort of competitive capacity. We have more numbers in, now fit model and bikini in the masters categories than we ever have. And it's actually anticipated that those categories might actually surpass some of the younger or like the open age categories. For a woman who maybe right now she's actually looking at the contest schedule and is trying to determine whether or not her body is actually ready to go into a prep to, have a rigorous competitive season, or if that isn't the case and she actually needs to take some time off and work on rebuilding and priming herself for prep, what are some of the lab markers that you would use, whether they be on an HTMA or otherwise, to make that determination for her?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a big fan of looking at baseline markers. So first of all, what is happening with your hormones? What is your baseline at? So you will I mean, you might feel good in your body, or you might feel like, oh, depending on how intuitive you are, there's certain changes that are happening, but never go based off that. Like, we need to take a look at what for instance, I'm a huge fan of the Dutch test. I like to see what's going on with progesterone, what's going on with your estrogens, definitely like your diurnal cortisol. So that's like your cortisol pattern. What is that like? Is it healthy? Like, do you have that peak in the morning and then is there a gradual decline? What is happening there? If it's looking like very bumpy or like it's a roller coaster, you've got ups and you've got downs, probably not the best idea to start to enter into a competition. Like I think we need to get that to figure it out first before you can move forward. Of course, though, like with perimenopause, the thing that can happen is 1 month your hormones might be perfect, the next month they might not be, right? And so what I would actually say is rather than diving straight into a Dutch, what you can do is see if you're ovulating every month and maybe do that for like, 3, 4 months if you're able to. So you can buy LH strips and you're obviously going to ovulate usually around anywhere from 12 to 16 days before your menstrual cycle. So if your menstrual cycle is not regular, I would recommend testing the LH strips to see if you're going to ovulate maybe as soon as your period's over. If you're someone who's fairly regular, start testing around like day 8 just to be on the safe side and take a look if there is monthly ovulation that is happening. If it is, then you're definitely run the Dutch test. It'll give us like solid insight. If you're someone who's kind of all over the place, where it's like sometimes you ovulate, sometimes you don't, then the results on the Dutch test, specifically to the progesterone and the estradiol, might be a little bit skewed. So definitely when you run the test, you want to make sure that you ovulate and then you run the test about like 7 days after. But those are the markers that I would want to see is what's happening with progesterone, what's happening with estradiol, what's going on with your diurnal cortisol. Of course, like with perimenopause, there is definitely thyroid function that is decreased. So it's never a bad idea to take a look at what's going on with your thyroid. And when I say testing your thyroid, I don't just mean going to your family doctor, your general practitioner, and getting TSH looked at, because TSH isn't actually a thyroid hormone, it's a pituitary gland hormone, right? So we want to take a look at what's going on with your free T3, your free T4, even thyroid antibodies. There's so many women walking around with elevated thyroid antibodies. They haven't been diagnosed with Hashimoto's and they may not have an autoimmune disease, but there's definitely things that are happening with the thyroid that the thyroid needs support. Now, the thyroid matters because it's a master metabolism hormone. And so if you are entering a competition where we need to ensure that your metabolic health is key, we want to definitely ensure that the thyroid's working optimally. And so, even like utilizing the HTMA, the hair tissue mineral analysis, would be great, making sure that you aren't in a state of burnout, making sure that those minerals are at optimal levels. Like that would be a great place to start. So, I know I kind of just threw all this at you, but
No, that's great. And if I can actually stay on that for just a moment. So for those women, again, because we're talking about our masters competitors who are typically,
yes.
40, 45 and up, we should anticipate that their hormone balance is actually going to be rather imbalanced because it's in flux. That's what the state of life is. So from what you're saying, does that mean that they shouldn't actually consider competition?
No, I'm not saying that they shouldn't consider competition. We just want to make sure, so specifically for them, because there is going to be this imbalance with their sex hormones, that things like cortisol are completely dialed in, minerals are dialed in, and that they are optimizing their lifestyle and their nutrition for what their body needs. And the way
Okay.
to do this would be to run the testing to figure out like where does their body need support.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. We agree with that completely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in terms of progesterone, can you speak to progesterone resistance or deficiency and how it might show up in female athletes, both in labs and in real life?
Yeah, for sure. So progesterone resistance, or the like just the like, so naturally what happens is you are going to see deficiency sometimes in women when they're going through perimenopause. And that's because your progesterone is a hormone that naturally starts to decline around the age of 35. It slowly starts to decline. And then, the older you get, the lower it gets. And then estradiol, of course, follows. But the key issue with progesterone here is that it really helps counter estradiol. And so we want to make sure that it is that we keep it for as long as we can. And so in labs, very often what I will see in women who are anywhere from like 35 to like 40, 45, I'll sometimes see that like progesterone declines first while estrogen or estradiol still maintains the value that, we want to see that's optimal. But then this kind of throws women off in terms of their cycle. And so a lot of the times what will happen is their periods will either be very heavy, be very painful, crampy, and then of course PMS, mood swings, water retention is huge. Some women will report that a week, sometimes even 2 weeks leading up to their period, it's like their jeans don't fit. Like they're just so bloated. And that'll obviously throw off the number on the scale. They'll think, oh my gosh, this program's not working, this protocol's not working, what's going on? But really what's happening is it's just water retention because of this decline in progesterone. And so, there are natural ways to support this, but once you get to a certain age, so, if you're in your 40s, something like a chaste tree might not necessarily help completely. And so this is where we sometimes need to look into like bioidentical hormone replacement therapy, depending on the individual and the symptoms that are presenting for them.
And so now with progesterone specifically, we know that when we're in a high stress state, which, Angelica and I can both attest to the fact that our contest prep athletes are absolutely they're under chronic stress. They're in a calorie deficit. They are training so much more. They're constantly working on progressive overload. Cardio is probably, going up. And then there's, of course, all of the mental stress of anticipating your show, checking every box, comparing yourself to other athletes or whatever you anticipated your progress to be. So when that happens, we know that whether or not you're in perimenopause, progesterone is impacted. So when an athlete, just by default of being an athlete, is doing things to essentially burn out their systems, increase cortisol, and, unfortunately cut progesterone off at the knees, what can they do to actually still continue to pursue peak performance? Or is that actually a contradiction of terms and of goals?
No, so I think, there are like a few things you can do. Some of these things are going to work for women, some might not. It's really going to depend on the individual. But for instance, like timing when you're refueling your body, making sure that you're having like carbs around your workouts just to help blunt that cortisol can definitely help. Because when you have like low progesterone, then you pair it with high cortisol because of this increased output from the gym, it can actually like increase muscle breakdown and then increase the fat storage, especially around the belly fat, right? So that's something that you can do. The other thing, and this is like one of those things where some people are like, I'm going to do this, and others are like, this sounds too complicated, but even cycle syncing training. So if they are still like regularly cycling, having a menstrual cycle, maybe working with their menstrual cycle in terms of what their workouts are going to look like. And so I understand that they probably have like this regimen that they have to follow. There's a certain lift that they have to do, but maybe, like where they really lift heavy and hard is going to happen around their ovulation when there's a little bit more power and around like the follicular phase. Whereas when they're leading up closer to their menses, when their bleed is about to come, or even in like that last week, their like late luteal phase, maybe that is not the time where they do like all this heavy lifting, but it's just more so they're like increasing their reps, or like even if they're able to like focusing more so on the cardio aspect, like walking longer rather than lifting a lot heavier.
Yeah, I think being able to be more functionally minded in bodybuilding, I think like me and Simona talked about this so much, it's definitely like the missing link in the industry. And if you are able to incorporate, like seed cycling or just being more mindful about your workouts with what cycle you're in, like I think that makes all the difference in the world. And I know for me personally, it made a huge difference because back on when I was doing my prep, my cortisol was so high that it was really suppressing my progesterone, and that led to really high estrogen. And so now going forward, I know that I want to take like this new information and knowing what I know now into the next prep and seeing like what a difference it could make. Um, so why would you consider gut health the importance in body recomposition and energy, even for those who don't have obvious digestive systems?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is like your gut is really such a key foundation because that's where nutrient absorption happens. That's where hormone clearance happens. This is where systemic inflammation can even occur. And so really, like, you don't necessarily have to have digestive issues, feel bloated, or experience issues with your guts, so to speak, for you to not necessarily absorb nutrients. I want to say like about, it's not 100%, but like 95 to like 98% of women that I work with will not complain about bloating specifically, but they have very low stomach acid levels. They are not digesting proteins or fats very well, and therefore they're not really absorbing it. And so, and when I say they don't complain about bloating, it's not like they wake up bloated, right? They experience bloating, but they attribute it to a food that they're eating. So for instance, I had a slice or two of pizza. I felt a little bloated, or I went overboard with the charcuterie board, felt a little bloated, or they attribute it to like things that they eat, or it's like, oh, I have this smoothie. There was something in it. It bloated me, but it's all good. But we don't think about this as being a gut issue or a digestive issue. We just think it's more of a food issue. This is something that I ate, and it caused this inflammation to happen. When really what's probably happening is there's the low stomach acid. Therefore, it is preventing you from properly breaking down the nutrients and then being able to absorb them. Now, if you're training and you've got these big goals, you care about macros, right? It's probably because you also care about the nutrients. Like, you want to make sure that your body is able to break down, digest that protein, absorb it so you can build that muscle, like pull the amino acids from it to pull back into your own muscle so that you grow and that you reach your goals. And if your stomach acid level is low, then that's going to be a problem. So that's like the one aspect of it. The other aspect too is that there could be systemic inflammation as a result of pathogens in the gut. So many women, especially in North America, have H. pylori bacterial pathogen. It's highly contagious, right? And a lot of people don't even realize that they have it because they don't have outward symptoms of it. So, key symptoms of H. pylori, and just because you have these doesn't mean you have H. pylori, but a lot of it comes down to like having acid reflux, or you always feel like you have heartburn. Some women will say that they just like they feel bloated, they wake up bloated. Sometimes they have like stomach pains. It almost feels like they have an ulcer, but they don't technically have an ulcer yet because we know that H. pylori can cause ulcers. But like all of these, so whether it's a pathogen, like a parasite, like I said, the H. pylori parasite, whatever it might be, candida, yeast overgrowth, this can definitely impact the way that your body is breaking down food and affecting that nutrient absorption.
So our clients do tend to show up with a lot of symptom at the level of the gut. That's very, very common for bodybuilders. And I know we've spoken about this together before as a group, but typically that's the red flag that finally gets them to, raise their hand and ask for help because it directly impacts the way that they look on stage or they look at the gym. And this is an aesthetic sport. How you look is really what's going to get your placing at the end of the day. But can you actually walk us through a case where, with or without gut symptoms, it was a gut healing protocol that directly improves strength and fat loss outcomes?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, I had this client not that long ago who basically would wake up bloated. And when she ate, like the more she ate throughout the day, obviously you're going to have more food as the day goes on, the bigger her gut would get. And it wasn't like just from the bloating, like it would just grow. And so for her, that obviously made her feel very uncomfortable, very heavy. And so we ran a GI map. Like, it's a non-negotiable. Like, I don't have x-ray vision. I don't think anyone does. It's really hard to know what's going on with someone specifically unless we run the functional testing. And so we ran the GI map, and while we were waiting for those results, like, we right off the bat knew that obviously her body was struggling with digesting protein because the more she was consuming a high protein diet, which is great, but if you're not breaking it down, then it's a bit of a problem. And so we worked on increasing stomach acid levels like naturally with like bitters in the beginning, obviously digestive enzymes just to help ease the discomfort, and just making sure that it's not even just about the supplements, but also when she was eating her meals, that they were being eaten in peace and that she was mindful about chewing. I find that a lot of people, especially when they're in a rush, they just quickly chew their food like once or twice and swallow. But you really got to break down your food to the consistency of applesauce to ensure that your body, like you're not only supporting the digestion with your stomach acid levels, but also your teeth are manually breaking down that food, and your saliva is coating it with the amylase enzymes to help even break down carbohydrates and so on and so forth. And so we followed a very simple principles in terms of like proper like digestion protocols, like making sure we're supporting digestion that way. And then we got her GI map back. So she actually had bacterial overgrowth. She had dysbiosis where her commensal bacteria, so the good, healthy bacteria, was very low. And it's because her opportunistic bacteria, the bad bacteria, was so elevated. So we put her on a protocol to crowd out the bad bacteria, regrow the good bacteria. And, when we did this, the bloating disappeared and she was able to see weight come right off her body. So all the exercise, all the workouts she was doing in the beginning, she felt like they weren't really paying off because she just saw her gut. Every time she looked in the mirror, she was like, all I see is this gut. Like there's some definition in my arms and my legs, but the gut is still there and it's so annoying. But once we did that gut healing protocol, it's like her body finally felt safe enough to release the rest of the weight that was stuck, concentrated in the midsection.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story. But it's I think it's one that we're all familiar with as practitioners. It really is such a powerful thing to do to actually go, I don't want to say like to chase symptom, but to acknowledge them, to, pay attention to what it is that your body is trying to say. And in the bodybuilding world, oftentimes we don't do that. We just blindly follow protocol and try and, silence the symptoms, try and band-aid the symptoms with quick solutions, sometimes that work for a moment, sometimes that don't work at all. And so, even going back to progesterone and estrogen and our cycles, one of the first things I think that we all really need to start doing is just tuning in, like to start actually paying attention, because long before the data of all of these amazing functional labs tells us the story, your body does through symptom. So I think that, whether you are just your average woman who is pursuing better health, maybe a better body composition, maybe even a certain aesthetic, or a bodybuilder who could be doing the same, when we really prioritize health, and actually start tracking not just our macros, not just our calories, not just our steps, and even our sleep for, the ones who are really doing a great job, but also how we feel after a meal, and maybe an hour and a half after a meal. What does our body feel like head to toe when we're first waking up? All of those things are fantastic indicators. The quality of your menstrual cycle, the quality of your bleed, the changes, all of that speaks volumes. I think all of those things are things that actually tell us to start asking for help. And then the labs that you've talked about, all of them, and then, there's obviously so many more that we all have access to. Those are the things that really lay out the pathway towards healing. And so, to hear that her weight started to fall away is amazing, but absolutely common. I can't even imagine the amount of inflammation that her body would have been carrying before introducing. And I love that you said simple protocols. But I also wonder, like what could her output at the gym actually have been when she was feeling so uncomfortable in her body? I think there's this natural increase in energy and therefore output when we actually just feel physically better being in our skin.
For sure. And you know what? As you were like rhyming off some of the things that we can look at, like little check-ins with ourselves, bowel movements are a huge one
Yes.
that people don't recognize. That is basically a report card as to how well your metabolism is functioning. Your body tells you every day, hey, like things are good or things aren't good. And a big misconception women have is that, because even a doctor will tell you, oh, as long as you go a few times a week, you're good. You need to go at least once every single day. Back in holistic nutrition school, like we learned 3 times a day is the gold standard. Like you should be going not directly after every meal, but within a few hours of every meal. Like it's normal to go. 3 times is where you want to be at. Twice is good. One is the minimum. And the bowel movements should be where when you go to the bathroom, you should fully release. You feel like you fully empty out. None of this, like, oh, I feel like I left something behind, right? And so that's just something that gets overlooked a lot of times.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for our athletes who are usually very gut health mindful and conscious, but we do believe that they can lack some bio individuality when it comes to gut health for sure. What is your go-to action steps for clients dealing with both gut dysbiosis and metabolic slowdown?
Yeah, so, we gotta really kind of take a step back and reassess in terms of where or what are they doing that is promoting any like gut imbalances, what could be slowing down their metabolism. So like I really look at the basics first, rather like before we even get any of the lab results back. Like I want to know when you wake up in the morning, do you feel energized? How is the quality of your sleep? If they're saying like, oh, sleep is good, but I go to bed really like I only sleep 6 hours a night, like that's probably not enough. And if you're waking up and you're not fully refreshed, like we got to change that. We got to change that. That's the first thing. The other thing I ask is about bowel movements, the quantity, but also the quality. That matters. That can tell us so much. When your bowel movements are loose, there's probably not enough fiber, or there's more inflammation in like at the gut level that we need to address. When they're more constipated, it's probably, we start with hydration first. If that doesn't fix it, then we got to take a look at what's going on with hormones a little bit deeper, like thyroid. Maybe that's impacting it. Detoxification, the liver could be an issue. But we really just start off with very basic, simple things. Reducing inflammation in the diet. I mean, listen, I know a lot of your listeners are probably eating extremely clean. Everything is like macroed out for them. But sometimes what we don't realize is even the healthy foods can be problematic for us. I know in my own hormone healing and gut healing journey, I used to eat things like kale, banana, tomatoes all the time. And I mean, kale was deemed a superfood not that long ago. I had no idea that these foods were actually promoting inflammation in me because of a leaky gut that I had. So it's not that these foods were bad, it's just I was eating way too many of these foods to the point where small little food particles were now entering the bloodstream, creating this pro-inflammatory response in me. And so that was stalling my metabolism and weight loss, and also causing me to like break out in hives and rashes. And I had no idea that it was related to food. Here I was thinking like, oh, it must be like the brand new laundry detergent that I just switched to, or, something else. And so looking at like taking a step back and just recognizing that like how do I feel after I eat all these foods? Am I rotating my meals, or am I just eating plain chicken and broccoli and rice every single day for like weeks on end? Right? Like your body, and any gastroenterologist will actually tell you this. Your gut thrives on rotation. Your body needs to eat different foods. And so it's fine if you meal prep, and it's fine if you're like, okay, dinners for the next few days are gonna, for the next 3 days are gonna look like this. But the goal is every 3 days you swap out the protein. And maybe you're not eating the same protein all day long, but like if lunch has chicken, then maybe dinner is beef or salmon or, a fish or something like that. Um, so I know I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but like, do you see how we just start off with the basic things, making sure energy, sleep, bowel movements, taking a step with digestion, reducing inflammation, like these are things that we start with, and then we kind of build on them as needed.
No, I think the tangent of variety, specifically, like let's say in your proteins or in your carb source, I think that is huge. And it's actually something that is massively overlooked and maybe not even considered in the bodybuilding community. You kind of have two schools of thought. You've got the people who are, eating the exact same thing every single day because they've learned that these foods for a time being work for their body, they're reliable. And then you've got, the if it fits your macros crowd who are definitely better at, introducing lots of different food sources into their diet. I shared a post about this a couple of days ago. When I first started on a macros-based diet, I had a little bit too much fun with it, and the variety actually wasn't there at all. My carb sources were almost entirely Pop-Tarts because I just thought it was so cool that I could do that and still lose weight, until I couldn't. So I think that it's actually tremendous advice and something that our audience is really going to appreciate. It's such a simple shift that they can make. Even for those of our athletes who are actually prepping their meals, let's say 3 or 4 days in advance, just kind of playing, with kind of a little bit of a jigsaw puzzle and maybe moving some of your chicken to another day and some of your beef over to today. I think that could actually work really, really well to help them elevate the variety in their diet without really having to actually look for new foods. The food is there. It's just a matter of like, what's the order of consumption. So that was actually a really super tip. Now I want to ask you something a little bit offbeat. Just a fun question, because I know that as functional health practitioners, we all have our pet peeves in the industries, our likes and our dislikes. If you had to write a breakup letter with just one wellness trend forever, which wellness trend is getting dumped and what would you say?
Oh my gosh. Okay. God, this one is hard because I feel
A
like
minute.
there's so many of them.
Mhm.
I will say I am not into low carb dieting at all. At all. And you know what's really crazy this morning? And I don't know if this post is from today or yesterday or whatever, but I'm sure everyone knows him. Dr. Mark Hyman posted something about low carb dieting, and he said, "Stop hating on it." I mean, these weren't his words verbatim, but he said something around these lines of, "Don't hate on low carb diets, like they're extremely beneficial." And I'm reading this, and it's like, I get what you're saying. Like, yes, okay, I understand a little bit in terms of like for people with metabolic issues, more so like diabetes, like type 2 diabetes. I can see it. However, I still don't subscribe to it. I just can't. And the reason why is because I've worked with diabetics, and I'm not saying that they've just eaten just carbs, but I don't agree with going so low carb. And the reason why, especially for your community, you're so active, your body's preferred source of fuel is carbohydrates. It will choose carbs over fats and protein any day of the week. And so your body, you got to give it what it runs on best.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's a really great answer. And I mean, it is like it really is just a science. Like if your body is not getting that sufficient energy, it's going to go into that fight or flight. And like we've talked about before, all your systems in that way are just going to shut down. So it just like I totally agree with the low carb. I think it sometimes can definitely do more harm than good.
Yeah, and the thing is like when we talk about carbohydrates, obviously there's like better choices. Like there's better carbs versus carbs that maybe just aren't so great. And so when I'm talking about carbs, I'm not talking about the Pop-Tarts. Like I'm talking about like the better carbs for you, like the whole grains, the starchy vegetables, like what's actually going to give your body the nutrients that it needs to really flourish. And of course, like there's room for things like Pop-Tarts and cookies and whatever. But when you're eating a diet, like I just can't imagine my life without like a sweet potato or some rice or quinoa or even just like starchy veg. Like I just can't, or like some pasta. I cannot imagine it.
I just have to underscore the fact that you put quinoa on your list of carbs and not proteins. Thank you for that. Can we just set the record straight that quinoa is not a protein source? It's a carb
Yeah.
source that
And,
has some trace protein.
and neither are beans. I don't count beans as protein.
Agreed. Agreed completely.
That is also a carb.
Not that I'm being asked the question, but if I could break up with just one thing, it would definitely be the influencers talking, sharing their meals and talking about like, oh, like my high protein, and literally they're putting beans on their salad or they're having some quinoa and like the total protein for the meal is like 8 grams.
Right.
Girl, that's not high protein. That's not high protein. So I think everybody is definitely going to absolutely love this episode. Our community, I have to say, God, my hat's off to them. Got to give them credit. This is an educated group. They have been, whether they're hobbyists or professionals, in the field of bodybuilding. Some of them are personal trainers, some of them are coaches, nutritionists, dietitians themselves. They know a thing or two about this space, and yet I think that you were able to provide them with a lot of really interesting insights. So I'm really, really excited to get this out to everybody. I'm really excited to hear just the feedback. And if anybody wants to be in touch with Monika, we're going to be sharing her full, her bio and her links in the show notes. We're going to share this on Instagram as well. So if that's where you follow us, then you'll be able to get a direct link to her at monikaeva.ca, and then of course her Instagram as well. So you can keep an eye out there if you want to work with her directly. I know she's got she's got a program available right now. It's a group-based program, is it not?
I have a few different offerings, so I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but just come
Okay.
find me and we can figure it out.
Yeah, so we'll just make sure that we have all that in the show notes. So, Monika, thank you so much for joining us here on the podcast on Balance and Body Diagnostics. It was absolutely gold. And for all of you watching, you're definitely going to want to tune into our next episode. Someone that you might be familiar with. We're going to be sitting down with a very special guest. It's IFBB Bikini Pro, powerhouse mama, Brittany Shulman. So for those of you who don't know, she is one of our sponsored athletes, and she actually just ran a whole bunch of different functional labs. We've gotten her lab results back, and those have been delivered to her. So she's going to be able to break it all down for you, share with you why she came to us in the first place, what she was feeling. If you haven't met her yet, tell us a little bit about her bodybuilding career thus far. It's pretty impressive, and what it is that we're going to be doing to help her get back on stage after this recovery season so that you can see the best Brittany. Yeah, so you're definitely going to want to not miss out on that conversation. But again, Monika, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an amazing conversation. I guess we'll just see everybody really soon.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun, flat time.
Awesome. Thank you, Monika. All right.